Welcome back to ABA Beyond the Data. I'm your host, Jay Burton, BCBA, and the dad of two awesome boys who just happen to be on the autism spectrum. This show is designed for behavior analysts who are looking to bridge the latest research to our professional practices, and it is dedicated to providing practical solutions to the practicing clinician. The perspectives you will hear in this podcast come not only from research and my years of clinical practice, but also from living this journey of being a parent with children on the spectrum. It is also my hope that this podcast will start conversations and bring behavior analysts to be more than just clinicians, but the advocates for the change this field so desperately needs. And today's topic is one that always needs more advocacy and one that I feel close to my heart: trauma-informed care. While I prefer not to speak on it a lot, I spent a good portion of my childhood in foster care. I was one of the lucky ones, to be honest, placed with a good family, surrounded by social workers who never stopped fighting for me. But I was in foster care for a reason. It isn't my intention today to get into the details, and nor is it my intention to get your sympathy. But I need you to understand that for me, trauma-informed care isn't a buzzword. It's personal. And now, as a father of two boys on the spectrum, I understand that simply having that diagnosis increases their likelihood of abuse or for experiencing trauma events significantly over their lifespan. But beyond those strong and very persuasive reasons to support trauma-informed care for me, I'm also a pragmatist. Trauma-informed care is practical. When we design sessions that protect safety, build trust, and share control, kids learn more, families stay longer, and teams burn out less. That's not idealism, that's behavior analysis applied with intention. So here's what we're going to be covering for today. First, we're going to ground ourselves in what trauma actually is, beyond headlines and hashtags, and how it can show up in behavior we see every day. Then we'll talk about why trauma-informed lenses matter in ABA, connecting the dots between compassionate care and strong outcomes. And most of our time will be spent on the how. Concrete things us BCBAs and the RBTs out there can do this week to make sessions safer, more predictable, and more collaborative without sacrificing progress. There were a good number of articles that were included in the research for this episode, and a lot of it's really interesting and dives deep into trauma-informed care, and I honestly encourage you to look these articles up when you get a chance. I will, of course, post them in the episode description, so just look out there for it. Now, today's episode, in many ways, is a continuation or a part 2 of our previous episode on the My Way intervention, also called skill-based training. Now, you don't need to listen to the previous episode for this episode to make sense. They are two completely different topics, and I'm covering each topic individually, but I want you to understand that trauma-informed care and skill-based training go hand in hand with each other. And it was for that reason that I put them alongside each other. Listening to the last episode is not a requirement, but it would provide a little bit of context as we will be slightly covering skill-based training in this episode, but nothing past surface level. But seriously, skill-based training is a wonderful intervention for severe behavior and yet still focusing on trauma-informed methodology. So if you're interested how you can reduce severe behavior and still be trauma-informed, go listen to that episode. Okay, and now a quick CEU reminder before we dive any deeper. There will be 3 key words scattered throughout today's episode. Jot them down or voice note them as you're driving, and then head to aba-ceus.com after the episode to grab your CEUs. Simple, straightforward, and it keeps this podcast going. And lucky for you, this podcast is one of those oh so rare but oh so important ethics CEUs. Let's dive on in. When we talk about trauma today, I want you to hear it in plain language. not as a diagnostic label floating somewhere above the learner, but as a lived experience that reshaped how a nervous system predicts the world. Trauma isn't just a bad thing that happened, it's the lingering imprint of experiences that overwhelmed a person's senses of safety or agency, so much so that the body starts prioritizing protection over participation. In ABA terms, those histories alter motivating operations and what situations function as warning signals. They change what feels aversive, what feels safe, and how quickly the scale tips from approach to escape. There are a few buckets people use to describe trauma. Acute trauma is the single event kind, the car crash, the terrifying medical procedure, the day everything changed, those sorts of events. And then there's chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is the drip, drip, drip of repeated adversity, ongoing bullying at school, daily shaming, persistent coercion that teaches a person their no won't be honored. Then there's complex trauma. Complex trauma is the knotted mix of events and relationships over time. Multiple separations, inconsistent caregiving, or a long term pattern of adult using control rather than collaboration. The specifics matter for treatment planning, but the unifying theme is impact. Did the experience erode the person's sense that the environment is predictable and that their choices matter? In our ABA context, the causes aren't always dramatic. They're often ordinary things done in a way that felt unsafe. Think about medical and educational procedures that come out of nowhere with no preparation and with no pause. Think about classrooms or clinics where adults lean on repeated coercion. Because I said so, do it now. You don't have a choice. And where a learner protest is met with the same demands turned up louder. Think of humiliating social experiences and bullying that leaves deep tracks. And think of restrictive practices like restraints that were used without a parallel plan to restore safety and rebuild trust. Or think about sudden separations from preferred caregivers, or chaotic schedule changes, or think of constant staff turnover. None of these have to be the big T trauma to shift how a learner scans for danger. And there are broader stressors humming in the background too, cultural and systematic factors. Things like stigma, discrimination, having your identity misread or dismissed. These things accumulate and build up. And then you have family stress and caregiver burnout, which change how the days feel. More rushing, fewer choices, quicker escalation. Even if a learner has no documented trauma history, these conditions that are in the background tilt the environment toward unpredictability and a loss of control. And our learners are exquisitely sensitive to those variables. So, how does this all show up? How does trauma show up from all of this? The behaviors tell the story. If we know what to look for, you'll see hypervigilance, the head constantly swiveling, the eyes scanning, the shoulders a little higher or in an unnatural state. You'll see freezing and avoidance, or the quiet refusal that some staff misread as noncompliance, when it's really just the nervous system pulling the brake. You'll see startle responses to sounds or touch that wouldn't register for others. You'll see sudden compliance collapse, where a learner who seemed fine now can't tolerate even simple demands because predictability has vanished. You'll see tight, controlling patterns around uncertainty, rigid rituals, strong bids to keep things in their way. You'll see escape patterns spike when adults move too fast or stand too close, or change plans midstream. Even sleeping and eating can shift. And as a result, us BCBAs fill our data sheets with things like task refusal or elopement or tantrum, when really what's going on is they have a loss of their sense of safety. I mean, think about it like this: behavior is just history plus current contingencies. And trauma is a major part of history we have to respect and consider. If the past taught a learner that adults won't honor no, or that demands arrive without warning, or that escape only happens after they escalate, then our current contingencies have to counter teach the opposite: predictability, choice, and reinforcement for safe, simple ways to get needs met. That's the same philosophy that makes assent-based models work. When we share control and lead with reinforcement, we change what adults come to predict. The arrival of adult to the moment no longer predicts that they are going to be faced with lack of choices, lack of reinforcement, and lack of freedom. It means the opposite, and that's what we have to work towards. And because trauma is so often undisclosed or unknown, we have to take a universal, precautious stance. We behave as if it could be there because it may be. And we design sessions that would be safe even if we knew the full story. That means we open with predictability and rapport, not surprise demand. We build in meaningful choices, not token ones. We teach and honor clear assent and withdrawal signals. We slow our row, widen our windows for success, and prioritize skill building over suppression. None of that dilutes ABA. It is ABA, aligned to learners' history. All right, guys, we're going to pause there just for a second. Our first keyword for today's CU is safety. 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 So why make this explicit to ABA? Let's connect the dots between this definition and our daily practice and look at how trauma-informed lenses strengthen outcomes without sacrificing science. When we look closely at what actually works, skill-based treatment models to assent-based practice, the heart of it lines up one for one with trauma-informed lenses. In the article, Toward Trauma-Informed Application of Behavior Analysis, the authors lay out 4 commitments we can operationalize, not as slogans, but as procedures we can teach, coach, and measure. First, we acknowledge trauma and its possible impact. Second, we ensure safety and build trust. And third, we promote choice and shared governance, what you could call observable assent. And finally, we emphasize skill building over suppression. If you listened to my previous episode on the My Way intervention, those 4 commitments will sound familiar because the entire model is built on them. Let's take these commitments one at a time and stay grounded in the realities of session life. First, acknowledging trauma and its impact means we design as if it could be present, even when it's undisclosed. In practice, that looks like what we already do in a well run practical functional assessment. We start by speaking with the parents and having an open ended discussion, and we discuss how distress shows up and, just as importantly, how adults tend to respond. If the history suggests that unpredictability and loss of control were common themes, we don't muscle through with more control. We build in predictability and shared control from the start. The point here isn't to extract a trauma narrative, it's to let history inform how we arrange today's environment. Second, we need to look at safety and trust. In the skill based training model, or the my way approach, you see this in the way we structure both the analysis and the treatment. Short, clean comparisons, clear stop criteria, and an adult who communicates with a tone and body that says, you're safe, you can pause, you can say my way or let me have it my way, and your words will actually work. And we're careful with extinction because we understand what it can feel like. We lean hard on reinforcement instead and on predictable rhythm that teaches the learner that adults will honor your appropriate temps before your escalations. Safety isn't just absence of crisis, it's the presence of cues that the next minute will make sense. When a learner experiences those cues consistently, trust grows and the entire context gets less evocative. And then there's the third commitment, which is choice and shared government or assent, really. This is the visible difference between a compliance driven room and a learning driven place. In skill based training models, we teach low effort communication responses that gain quick access, and we actually honor it. Then we shape tolerance to not now, and we keep it humane, brief, supported, and followed by success. That sequence does something profound for a shared governance. It proves to the learner that their voice changes the environment. In daily practice, it sounds like, do you want to start with blocks or drawing? Do you want me here or across the room? And it looks like honoring an opt out without punishment, without ridicule about the fact that they need a break, or saying, let's just do a little bit more. Then inviting the learner back into the task with dignity when they're ready. In our previous episodes, we talked about assent as something you can see and teach. Heads nod, eye contact is made, body language is open, and they may say they are on board with what's going on. In trauma informed ABA, assent is doubled down. It's not decorative, it's the engine of cooperation. All right, and the fourth commitment from the article is skill building. The skill based training or the My Way intervention sequence is unapologetically about teaching. First communication, then tolerance, then contextually appropriate skills during delays. We're not merely decreasing the topographic aspects of the behavior, but instead we are expanding a repertoire of skills that will give the child access to better parts of their life. Compassionate care isn't a personality trait you either have or don't. It's a set of clinical behaviors you can rehearse, prompt, and reinforce in your staff. Empathy means making contact with your client's experiences. Compassion means converting that contact into behavior that reduces suffering, adjusting the plan, celebrating the small wins, or slowing down and checking in before you press forward. In other words, compassion is observable and it's contagious. When supervisors model it in feedback, naming and praising a therapist for noticing the learners, maybe signal and offering a break instead of pushing, the culture learns to value exactly the actions that make trauma informed practices real. We shape the conditions under which staff can behave compassionately and still meet goals. The last thing I want you to consider before we jump into the actual implementation of trauma informed care, I want you to think about a recent survey of BCBAs that was conducted. It found that behavior analysts endorsed the importance of trauma informed care, but a lot of us didn't get formal training in it during our coursework or supervised fieldwork. So we believe it matters, we just weren't taught how to operationalize it. And the good news is, we don't need to wait for the board to release their next task list before we start moving ahead with our own training. We can build the skills locally, the same way we build any repertoire. Break them into teachable units, model them, practice them, and measure them. Can your team deliver authentic choices? Can they identify and honor an opt out? Can they keep the ratio of reinforcement and acknowledgement to corrections at a significantly low rate? And can they run the first few minutes of session in a way that signals safety and partnership? These things are trainable, and when you train them and reinforce them, you change the vibe of the entire organization. So, when I say trauma informed care belongs inside ABA, I don't mean a wholesale reinvention of the science. I mean, we apply the science to the parts that were sometimes left implicit: safety, trust, shared control, dignity, and we track them as rigorously as we track targets. We let the history inform the presence. We arrange contingencies that teach your voice works, and we coach our teams to respond to people and not just data paths. If you think back to my previous episode on skill based training, you know just how quickly behaviors change when the environment remains predictable and adults stay as a true partner. The lens of trauma informed care helps us do that by design, across cases, and not just when we happen to think about it, guys. So before we jump to the Monday morning how to, I want to name the elephant in the room. Most of us BCBAs weren't actually trained for this. That's not an indictment of individual BCBAs. It's a mirror held up to how our sequences, our practicums, and our CEU pathways have evolved. As I said, surveys of BCBAs find that we believe in trauma informed care. We believe it's extremely important, but at the same time, we report not having formal training on it. And understanding that this gap is there is critical because trauma and adversity are not rare edge cases. Depending on the data set you consult, roughly half to more than half of people will experience at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. And that's before we even consider the compound adversity that exists for individuals with disabilities. Given those base rates, behavior analysts are likely serving individuals with trauma histories, documented or not. And that reality should shape how we're trained and supervised. The reality is that practitioners overwhelmingly endorse trauma informed care, and we see it as critical to ABA's future, but our training infrastructure hasn't caught up yet. This is both an ethical and a practical issue. On the ethics side, we have obligations to do no harm, to work within our scope while we build competence in trauma informed care, and to support self determination. And on the practical side, we have to realign ABA practices we already use: pairing, skill acquisition, antecedent strategies, differential reinforcement, without extinction, of course, and articulate how those map to trauma informed commitments and trauma informed care. It's not an easy task, but the first thing this field must do is to broaden our measure of success in the research we are conducting. Too often, I read an article that states that the teacher and parents found that the intervention was acceptable and tolerable to implement. That's great. That's great, right? We love to hear that. But what about the client? How did they feel about it? Social validity should always include the recipients of the interventions, and too often I see that missed in research. How are we ever going to grow as a field if those that are producing the interventions and the research behind those interventions aren't even touching, not even looking at the sense, at the feelings of the clients, of the ones that are actually receiving the intervention? And you can ask yourself, like, what should these measures even include? And the fact is, they're easy things to measure and things that we can actually measure within our own sessions. But things like avoidance to going to the sessions, avoidance to going to the intervention, and measures of emotional distress. And these should be built in at the front end, not bolted in at the end as an afterthought, which I too often see in the studies is that it's like, oh yeah, social validity. Oh yeah. And our clients seem to actually enjoy the intervention. So, what do we do while the field catches up? We don't need to wait for permission. We go out and we seek the knowledge that we need to become more aware of trauma informed practices, whether it's inside the field of ABA or outside. And yes, this is a great place to start with this podcast, but this is not the end of the road. I'm just going to scratch the surfaces as we go through this. But understanding how to screen for trauma specific concerns or developing trauma specific treatments for a specific situation or type of trauma, if those aren't in your wheelhouse, then you need to reach out to somebody who has that type of experience or professional capabilities. And that person doesn't need to be in the field of ABA. But in general, what are some practical things that we can actually start doing in our next session? So let's dive on in and take a look at this. I want you to have a clear picture of what trauma informed ABA actually looks like, minute by minute. Everything I'm about to describe sits on the foundation of the work being done by those in trauma informed care of ABA, like Dr. Hanley and his colleague. And some of it's from my own personal experience of how to take from research to actually applying it. And the first thing I want to talk about is safety and predictability because nothing else works without the foundation being solid. And for children with autism, this is even more true. If you want to learn more about what a good predictability system looks like, go listen to my episode on Teach. But the whole system should be structured in a way that is predictable so that the child can understand what is actually happening. And one thing that I've built in, and one thing that I've seen in actual research as a supportive manner, is to develop a entrance ritual with the client. Now, I'm not talking about like some voodoo ritual here. We're talking about a routine with the client they and their therapist do at the beginning of every session. The moment a learner enters, I want that ritual to signal you're safe and you know what's coming. For me, it's the same warm greeting and the same cadence, the same quick check in about how they're doing. This is especially true for our younger learners that need clear, audible, and visual signals that they are safe. At which point, after that hug or that initial high five that I'm giving, we're pulling out the schedule to remind them of what they're doing throughout their day. For some learners, it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out exactly what that initial ritual is going to be. I had one kiddo that our initial ritual was that he got a piggyback ride on my back and we ran into the gym and I threw him into the ball pit. That was his ritual that we did every day for a long period. And he really looked forward to it. And I was the clinical director at the time of that location, and I really looked forward to doing it. So, I mean, it was an awesome ritual to be part of. And it was an awesome way to get him into the environment and to feel safe. I remember I had one very young learner that I worked with in home years back that had a history of trauma from a male figure in his life. And this was a long time ago, before I was BCBA, still doing God's good work of one to one, over a decade ago at this point. And when I first started, I would walk into the house and just sit there with an iPad playing Mickey Mouse and had some special snacks that I had brought in. This was before I knew what trauma informed care was, but I knew I had a child that did not feel safe being around me just because of who I was and how I looked. I understood basic principles of pairing and operant conditioning, and unfortunately, trauma was not what I was thinking about, but what I was doing unconsciously was trying to make that child feel safe. Regardless of the science behind it, the real motives for me was trying to make that child feel comfortable with this stranger that was coming into his own home every day. And this took a while for this little dude to come around to me. But eventually he realized I was going to come in and do the same exact thing, play Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and put out some really awesome treats for him and saying really nice things and talking in a silly voice. And that became our routine. And eventually he got closer and closer and warmed up. But for the rest of the time that I worked with that little dude, our sessions always started with Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. And eventually it got to the point where First thing he did when he saw me was run straight up to me and just jump up for a hug. I was honestly not thinking of trauma based care at the time. I had been thinking about pairing and classical conditioning and how to make myself less aversive to this child. But unconsciously, that is exactly what I was doing. I was taking the science of ABA and applying it in a trauma informed care way. The only thing is that I wasn't informed that I was doing it. I wasn't aware that I was doing it. But it's just a wonderful example of the fact that we can be doing these things with our own science, with our own current interventions, just with a change of mindset and understanding of why we're doing it. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. Let's talk about the environments in which we are working with our clients. The clinics or the areas we work should give a clear message. This is a safe and comfortable environment. A clean environment with clear paths to move around are essential for a child to feel safe. I'm on top of my staff all the time about keeping the clinic clean. If you're leaning, you're cleaning. That's my catchphrase. And it's not simple because I'm not a clean freak, guys. And so this isn't my natural state to be in. But when our environments are in chaos, our children feel that they are surrounded by chaos. So we need to make sure that their environment is decluttered and feels safe to walk around. A visible schedule the learner can touch, a predictable end of session routine and start of session routine, and exits that aren't blocked by bodies or furniture. I know that doesn't sound ideal for our elopers, but they need to feel that security that they can move around, that they have the freedom to move around. And yeah, of course, I'm not talking about keeping the front door of the building open, right? And I'm not, and I'm definitely not talking about having the environment be unsafe for our learners. But what I am talking about is that children should feel like they can move around. And if they elope, yeah, of course, we can block them if we need to and prompt FCT. But that feeling needs to be there, that they have freedom, that they can make decisions. Whether they have to use functional communication is a different thing, but they should still have that feeling of freedom. And an overly crowded or blocked exit environment does not say this is a free environment to be in. All right. And so once the room is safe and the staff have a good understanding about establishing routines within their sessions, be that routines of the start of sessions, following a schedule, end of session routines. Once they have a good grasp of that, and it's truly not difficult to train these aspects on for our staff, it's time to move into assent based practices. In earlier episodes, we treated assent like a visible skill because it is a visible skill. It is something that you should be seeing from your staff. But here we formalize it as shared governance. For each learner, we need to define what yes, okay, maybe, and no, stop actually look like and sound like. And I recommend these things to be written and documented somewhere. For some clients, it might be a nod or a mm-hmm or a hand tap or a solid just nope. And when clients don't have those skills, it's our job to teach those signals just like we teach any other functional communication, model, prompt, and reinforce fast when it shows up. Typically, my first functional communication skills that I'm training are literally replacement skills for escape behavior, for access behavior, for supportive behavior, like saying help, saying all done, I need a break, stop, not yet. These are critical vocabulary that the children need to have, whether it's coming from their actual vocals or from a PEX board or from a device. It doesn't matter, but the kids should have this right at the beginning of ABA if you actually want to be doing assent-based practices. If they don't have a way to withdraw assent, you're just simply not doing assent-based practices. So build that in and define it clearly for your staff to understand. If a learner taps out, they say we need a break or I need a break, we pause within 3 seconds. If they say not yet or I'm not ready, we scale back and try a shorter step or a different entry point. The session is built with an opt out architecture. There's a clear available break card or a communication form that allows us to step out, allows our clients to exit as they need. And let me just go on a little bit of a tangent here for a second. Take a break should not be a punishment corner for our kiddos. It should not be a you get to do nothing. We need to take breaks just as seriously as you and I take breaks. My younger son is a stimmy little dude. He has a lot of energy, and sometimes he just needs to take a break for a moment and stand in the same spot and flap his hands or run laps around the living room, or at ABA, he runs laps around the gym. Giving kids a comfortable environment, a place where they feel comfortable taking a break is very important for our kiddos. A break shouldn't just be like, oh, let's sit at the desk and just look at our hands while I put in data. You asked for a break, so yeah, I'm giving you a break, but you're just going to sit here. I'm not saying give them the iPad, give them the reinforcement that they're working for, but let's take a step away from the desk. Let's take a step and go do something to get a little bit movement going on. Go jump on a trampoline for a second. Let's go into the sensory room and look at these cool lights for a moment. Or let's just go find a quiet corner to de escalate, to regulate ourselves for a moment. Those are the breaks that we take. How many of you are pulling out your TikTok or your Facebook for a quick few seconds while you're working on, treatment plans, or you're in between supervisions? Yeah, like all of you are doing that. Do the same thing for your clients, right? Facebook is probably not your highest reinforcer, but it is a nice little mental regulation standpoint. Probably actually causes more stress, but that's a whole different topic and discussion for a different day. But the point is the same, right? Like, give yourself and give your clients a break that you actually deserve, right? If they've been working hard, or if you're just having a day that they're struggling and they need that break, give them a natural break. All right, I'm going to step off my tangent box there and we'll move on to giving the child choices. Choices are meaningful. They're not cosmetic. I have trained my staff diligently and thoroughly to constantly be offering choices for our clients. Do you want to sit here or on the floor? Do you want to sit at the red table or the green table? Do you want to use the pink brush or the yellow brush? Do you want to play Don't Break the Ice or Zingo? Do you want to play with this kinetic sand first, or do you want to play with the rice and beans first? That much choice isn't chaos, it's governance. If you want an easy bar for your team, here's a quick check. In any 10 minutes, the learner should contact at least 4 authentic choices. When choices are developed and implemented in session, and functional communication is presented to allow for opt outs, you are developing natural diffusions into your sessions, which allow for a serious fresh breath of air to be brought in to your whole clinic's vibe, giving that shared co governance over your sessions relieves so much stress from everybody. So much tension is just let go. It's no longer like, well, I said so because so you're going to do it. Like, I can just this week think of a client that recently was an ABA at a different clinic, at a different organization, and he comes in and he screams at full voice that, no, I'm not going to do it. And I just honored it. And the shock in the kid's face as he was not expecting me to just go like, okay, yeah, we'll pick something else to do. He was expecting a battle. He was expecting a pure follow through. But to me, in that moment, the task that I was talking about really did not matter. And I could just tell that the clinic he had been coming from was an old school compliance based facility. I felt no tension in my shoulders as I gave up governance. And that kid had such relaxation after he just stopped having to fight for what he wanted. Co governance through plentiful of choices and honest assent, withdrawal, acceptance is the way to go. It's the name of the game here. This alone will have such a huge impact on your sessions. Okay, with assent in place, the next thing we need to look at is we teach reinforcement first and without defaulting to coercion. Pairing isn't a pre service superstition, it's how you keep the situation acceptable for the client while you shape new responses. I'm liberal with my non contingent safety cues early, warm attention, easy proximity. A few free minutes with materials we'll be using and short adult bids that are easy to meet. When I shift to instructional demands, I start where success is likely and keep the steps tiny. Micro tasks and chaining are your friends here. If the goal is to get a child who has an aversion to sitting at the table, the first step might be to just be in the room where other kids sit at the table and work. Then contact reinforcement. Then maybe they sit next to the table and contact reinforcement. And then maybe they touch the chair and then contact reinforcement. And this happens over a matter of weeks or months. And at every moment and at every step, the child is having his voice heard to escape if necessary. When the learner's history says delays have been dangerous, we make delays brief and supported and we signal them clearly. Okay, now let's talk about re traumatization. Now, let's be direct about avoiding re traumatization. The fastest way to sabotage all of this is to spring surprise demand. Use forceful physical guidance to block exits with your body, gather a crowd during escalation, or lean on lengthy planned ignoring as if silence were natural. It isn't. Silence can be punishing in a way that feels like abandonment. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go on another tangent here for just a second because I hate planned ignoring. Planned ignoring, at least the way about 90% of individuals, maybe that's an overestimate, but so many individuals in ABA use it, is not trauma informed. I don't even talk about planned ignoring in my clinics anymore because if I say to use planned ignoring, somebody is just going to completely ignore the child. And that is absolutely not what we should be doing. You can give zero attention to a behavior while still giving 100% attention to a child. I can have a child acting up and complete disruption and still be maintaining eye contact and telling him that if he wants to have any of my attention, to just ask for it. Giving the silent treatment to a child is not trauma informed and it's honestly just messed up. So please just stop doing it. Here's the important thing to understand. What causes re traumatization is going to be case by case. What is important is that you look for those assent withdrawal signals and those emotional responses. Physical touch and physical guidance is, of course, a common re traumatization trigger. That is why it is so important that physical guidance for teaching be absolutely limited, and that if a child pulls away, you do not force the physical follow through, but instead honor the pull away as assent withdrawal. But it's not just these obvious ones. I would not call trauma a spectrum, but rather an array. It doesn't just come in 100 different colors. It comes in 100 different colors for a million different situations. Going back to that story of a younger client I had who had an aversion to male therapists, I fortunately approached that situation with the right mindset. Nobody told me what had caused that aversion, and to this day, I do not know, and I don't think I want to know. But what I saw was a child who was in distress. Going into every session assuming that there is a history of trauma does not mean that you are assuming that bad things have happened to everyone. It simply means taking a step back when you see an individual in distress and reassessing how you can make this situation easier for them to adjust to. And if you're thinking, this is a lot, it's a lot to remember, team on board to adjusting to this. The thing is, we need to teach it in small little steps. So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Like
Oh no, I'm not doing all this stuff right now, so I'm not trauma informed. Oh no, I'm treating my clients absolutely terribly. No, I don't want you to get that message from this. What I want you to walk away from this with is that this is all doable. It's all things that we can train. We're not talking about changing our whole practice here. We're talking about making minute adjustments and then reinforcing it and ensuring that it's actually happening with our staff and with our clients. So pick one thing to tighten this week. Maybe it's predictability. Work on what your openers with your clients look like. Audit your rooms for like too many clients in the same spot at the same time. Make sure that when a behavior or an escalation occurs, there's not like 50 people responding, just the right number of individuals. Just pick one thing to work on for this week. All right, and the last bit of skill sets that I want to talk about for tonight for trauma based care is how to recognize a child's emotions in the middle of a behavior and how we can be supportive without accidentally feeding the behavior we're trying to replace. In trauma informed ABA, the move is not to ignore feelings, it's to respond to feelings in a way that keeps the feelings of safety high and contingencies clean. The first thing we need to do is anchor to what we can observe. I'm not guessing at private events, I'm contacting the public signals of emotions. Kids vocalizing distress, maybe engaging in increased stimming, eyes looking down, or a body that suddenly goes still. When I see those precursors, I shift into a supportive narration with a neutral, steady tone. I'll say, I hear your voice is loud and your hands are flapping. Let's take a break. That sentence does two things. It labels the state and it reintroduces a safe off ramp that we've already taught. Notice what I didn't do. I didn't repeat the demand and I didn't deliver the reinforcer for the problem behavior. I'm pairing safety language with the opportunity to use the replacement responses we've been building. Second, I differentially reinforce regulation, not escalation. When the learner uses the communication response, my way, please, or help, or break, or even a trained gesture, I give quick, rich reinforcement. If the FCR comes right on the heels of a problem behavior, I create a small buffer, like 5 seconds of calm, or even maybe two or three before delivering. So the reinforcement is clean, but otherwise, I'm still going to reinforce it if we got FCT. During that brief gap, I keep my voice supportive and low in information. You're okay. I'm right here. That kind of neutral, predictable assurance is different from the attention that negotiates, explains, or even debates in the middle of escalation. It signals safety without turning into a reward for the very topography we're trying to replace. Third, I teach what support looks like when big feelings show up. It's good to practice it in an easier moment so that it's fluent in the hard ones, but practice it in both. I'll model taking deep breaths. I will prompt, I need squeezes or I need a hug. I will narrate what they appear to be feeling. It looks like you're sad right now, or I'll narrate what triggered them. I know it sucks that our friend has the toy and it isn't available right now. We can get access later. When I see even a fragment of relaxing, softening volume, breaths lengthening, eye contacts flickering, I reinforce it. That's it. You're settling. You've got a calmer body. And I deliver access for the communication responses that they need to get access or to escape the situation. Over time, the child learns that the fastest path to relief isn't to scream or bolt. It's the tiny regulation behaviors that lead directly to the requests that work. And a common question I get is if the behavior is attention maintained, isn't talking at all during the escalation reinforcing? And the answer is it can be. If our words function as the same reinforcement the behavior is going after. But a child that is engaging in a major meltdown for attention isn't likely to be looking for a calm, collective response that we will be delivering. They're looking for a big response that they've gotten at home or at school. They're looking for the person to lose it. That's the attention that they have typically gotten. That's what they're looking to get out of you, is for you to blow your top. And it's our job to show them that with us, they will continue to get a stable, calm response. Think of supportive narration or our prompts as NCR for safety. Brief and the same tone every time, while the big reinforcers stay contingent on the FCR or on the micro successes we've shaped. If the child is seeking tangibles, I'm not handing over the toys because they're upset. I'm handing over the toy because they said, my way, please, or my turn, please, or whatever the communication form you've taught. After that heartbeat, just that heartbeat of calm. If the child is seeking attention, I keep my in crisis language short and steady, and then flood praise and engagement the moment I see okay or help or my way. Okay, and finally, we plan for repair. After a tough moment, we co regulate back to baseline and then immediately arrange an easy win. One micro demand, quick success, and immediate reinforcement, so that the last memory of the session is competence and not meltdown. We also reflect on the strength that we saw from them. You asked for help and that worked, or you said okay and you waited. You did it. That was amazing. That's not just feel good talk. It's shaping. You're putting your attention on the exact behaviors that will carry the next hard minute. So yes, please recognize emotions. Name them out loud. Be the steady nervous system in the room, and at the same time, let the environment teach that relief and reconnection come through simple, taught skills. Ask, pause, brief okays, tiny steps of success. That's how you stay supportive without reinforcing the problem behaviors, and it's how you turn big feelings into opportunities to practice the very responses that keep everyone safe. Okay, guys, we're going to pause there for just a second. Our second keyword of the day is choice. 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 If you supervise a team, this is where belief turns into behavior. We build the repertoire locally the same way we build any skill set in ABA. Short teaching, immediate practice, precise feedback, and simple measurement that everyone can see. Think micro modules you can run in a standing meeting without blowing up the schedule. I like a 4-week loop, 15 minutes a piece, and then we recycle with tougher examples. Week 1 is safety and predictability. Week 2 is assent and a choice. Week 3 is reinforcement, first teaching, and week 4 is compassionate care skills. Then we do it again the next 4 weeks with new scenarios, new role plays until the moves feel like muscle memory. And I understand how busy a clinic is and how much turnover is. And that's why I recommend just doing this for 15 minutes across whatever your meeting structure is. If it's bi-monthly, bi-weekly, or weekly. I'm not talking about dedicating a huge amount of time. This skill set, honestly, it's complicated, but the base of it is so easy to understand. So if you're a clinical director, you can roll all this out without a new line item in the budget. 15 minutes per week or per month, one skill at a time, and in agreement that will treat safety, assent, choices, and compassionate responding as first class clinical behaviors. And when you look up in a month or in 2 months, you'll notice the rooms feeling different. Staff will open sessions the same way. Pauses will be honored quickly. Choices will be baked into rhythm, and reinforcement will be dense and honest. I know that sounds like a miracle, but the fact is that this is what we all truly want. At least the good clinicians. We want to do better. We want our sessions to run better. We want there to be co-governance with the clients because we understand and we know that co-governance works better for everybody. So when the leadership says that this is okay, that this is how we're going to be doing things, people jump on board. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to go over a few ethical research notes as this is an ethics CEU. So I want to wrap it back to our ethics code. And trauma-informed ABA aligns directly with our ethics code. It centers dignity and least restrictive alternatives by designing sessions that are predictable, reversible, and rich with reinforcement. Let me map this straight onto the ethics code so you can hear exactly where trauma-informed ABA lives in our obligations. When we open a session with safety cues, predictable routines, and reversible steps, we're doing least restrictive, dignity centered work. That is code in motion. It's 2.14, selecting, designing, and implementing interventions, and 2.18, least restrictive procedures. Because we're choosing reinforcement first, shaping heavy procedures that minimize the need for intrusive strategies, and we're planning from the start how to fade anything restrictive as the learner skills grow. And when we say out loud, we can pause anytime and actually honor that pause, we're protecting dignity, which is 4.11, protecting clients' dignity. Not as a slogan, but as an observable clinical behavior. Trauma informed also means we keep consent alive across sessions, not just at intake. Teaching and honoring assent, visible, yes, okay, maybe, and no, stop, or maybe later, and using a quick pause pathway is how we operationalize 2.09, communicating about services and obtaining consent, and 2.06, involving client. When we choose dense reinforcement and small little steps and humane delays, we're meeting 2.12, behavior reduction programs, and 2.01, providing effective treatment. We're prioritizing reinforcement-based procedures, arranging brief supported, not narrow, moments, and teaching replacements such as saying help or please or okay that makes escalation unnecessary. And finally, measurement seals it off. Measuring things like less assent withdrawal, measuring things like easy transitions into sessions, measuring your staff actually honoring assent. And none of this scales without supervision that teaches dev repertoires. The micro modules, completing IOA on assent recognition, and scoring how often they're actually giving acknowledgement to correction. Those are our responsibilities under 3.01, responsibilities to supervise and train others, and 3.02, delegation and oversight of our staff. Trauma-informed care is already built into our ethics code, and while it doesn't just blatantly say trauma-informed care like it should, it does map onto it. All right, guys, we're going to pause there. Our third and final keyword is dignity. 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 All right, guys, that's a wrap for today. If you got all three keywords, head over to aba-ceus.com, pop them in, and claim your CEU for this episode. It takes a minute and it keeps this show rolling so we can keep bringing you research you can actually use on Wednesday morning. If this helped, share it with a teammate. send it to a new RBT on your caseload or the BCBA who's just learning of assent or trauma-informed care. And if you want to keep this show going, but you don't need to purchase CEUs right now, or maybe you're just not a BCBA, you can still support it by donating. Just head over to my website, aba-ceus.com, and go to the donate page. Thanks for spending this hour with me and for the work you're doing for the kids and families you serve. I'm Jay Burton, BCBA, and as always, thanks for going beyond the data.
Bye, see you next time.